So today we're tackling one of Franz Kafka's most haunting stories, A Hunger Artist. It's about a man whose entire life is his art, and his art is, well, it's fasting. But this isn't just a story about suffering. It's really about what happens when a person's life work is judged by public attention and how a life like that just can't survive in that kind of world. All right, let's just get right to the heart of it with this one question, because this is everything. This is the lens we're going to look through for this whole analysis. It changes the story from just a sad tale into something that feels, well, way more modern and, frankly, a lot more unsettling. The idea that you can be profoundly devoted to something and it becomes irrelevant, not because you're a fraud, but just because the world has moved on. So Kafka himself tells us the artist fasts because he cannot do otherwise. And you really have to let that sink in. This is the absolute foundation for understanding him. His art, it's not a choice. It's not some grand performance of willpower. It's just who he is, an inner compulsion. He's not fighting off temptation because for him, there is no temptation. And it's that very thing, that lack of a big dramatic struggle, that really unnerves the people watching him. Okay, so that brings us to our first big idea here, a devotion without desire. We're going to try and get inside the artist's head a bit and figure out what it means to be devoted to something without all the things we think go with devotion, like struggle or temptation or even desire itself.
And here's the real dilemma, isn't it? We're all kind of programmed to believe that for something to have meaning, it has to be a struggle. It has to be hard. But what if it's not? The artist actually confesses at the end that he only fasts because he could never find any food that he actually liked. I mean, wow. Does that bombshell just make his whole life's work hollow? Or does it make his devotion even purer, more absolute?
The philosopher Albert Camus had a really powerful take on this. He basically argued that what bothers people isn't that the artist is starving, it's that his starvation has no triumph in it. There's no big struggle, so there's no big victory at the end. For Camus, if you're sincere but you're not fighting against anything, well, it just becomes kind of empty. It's something an audience just can't grab onto. But then you've got Susan Sontag, who just flips this whole thing around and points the finger right back at us, the audience. She asks, what if the problem isn't the artist at all? What if our discomfort comes from the fact that we demand suffering to have a point, to be dramatic, to build to some climax? When we find out his fasting is easy, we feel cheated, right? Like he owed us a better show. So at the end of the day, here's the really crucial takeaway. Kafka seems to be telling us, yes, the artist is sincere. His devotion is 100% real. But, and this is a huge but, in the kind of world he lives in, a world that craves spectacle, sincerity just isn't enough to save you. You can be utterly devoted and still just fade away. All right, so let's move on to our next section, art versus the audience. This really builds on what we were just talking about. We're going to look at that broken and, let's be honest, fatal relationship between the artist and the people who watch him, or more importantly, the people who stop watching.
This is a question that gets to the absolute core of any creative person's life, right? Think about it. The hunger artist's biggest problem isn't the hunger itself. It's the people around him, the audience, his managers. They're constantly suspicious, they doubt him, they put limits on him, and then, poof, they're gone. So what's the deal? Do you need an audience for your art to mean anything? Or does the audience just ruin it every time?
The thinker Theodor Adorno has a really sharp take on this. He says the audience is basically just the market. And the market doesn't just distort art, it disciplines it. That's such a great word for it. It forces art into a neat little package that can be consumed on a schedule. And any art that refuses to fit into that schedule, it just becomes intolerable to a world that wants quick entertainment. But we can't just blame the audience. The scholar Stanley Korngold makes a great point about the artist himself being impossibly rigid. He wants recognition without translation. Think about that. He wants people to believe him without him ever having to explain himself. He wants to be seen, but not necessarily understood. And as Korngold says, that's just an impossible demand for any public art. So really, the failure here is mutual. It's a total breakdown on both sides. You have the artist, who absolutely refuses to compromise or adapt his art in any way, and then you have the audience, which refuses to be patient or give any real, sustained attention. And right there, in that gap between the two, the meaning of the art just disappears. And that leads us perfectly into our next idea, the 40-day limit. This isn't just some random number in the story. It's Kafka's huge metaphor for how our world takes something real and raw and then packages it, controls it, and ultimately kind of defangs it. 40. Just 40. This number is what drives the artist crazy. It's not the hunger. It's this arbitrary limit. He knows, he insists he could go on for way longer. But the manager always cuts it off at 40 days. And why? Not because the artist is at his limit, no. It's because the audience's attention span is. The clock is in charge here, not the artist's devotion. And you can see how it all breaks down right here. You start with something that could be a meaningful ritual, but then it gets turned into a public spectacle. From there, it's packaged up into a product you can sell tickets to. And finally, you slap a limit on it. The artist's inner drive gets totally replaced by a timetable.
What the 40-day limit does is it turns the artist's suffering into something safe, predictable. It becomes pain without any real consequence. The writer Milan Kundera has the perfect word for this: kitsch. It's a way of reassuring the audience, don't worry, the serious stuff won't last too long. It completely strips the act of its genuine weight.
So the bottom line is this. When you're forced to package meaning so it can be consumed, the very first thing you lose is time. Real meaning, real depth, that stuff requires duration. You need time to sit with it, to think about it. But packaged entertainment just wants a quick reaction, and in that rush, all the depth gets squeezed out. Okay, let's get to the final, absolutely unforgettable part of the story, the panther's answer. After the artist just wastes away, they replace him with something completely different, a panther. And the contrast between them is what makes the ending so devastating. So the hunger artist dies. They just sweep his body out with the dirty straw. And in that very same cage, they put this young, vital panther. And instantly, the crowds are back, totally captivated. So the big question is, why? What does this panther have that the artist was so completely missing, at least as far as the world was concerned?
I mean, this comparison really says it all, doesn't it? The artist is all about withdrawal and saying no. His sincerity is invisible, and it demands that you take him seriously. The panther, on the other hand, it's pure presence, pure vitality. It's got visible power, and all it asks for is your admiration. One affirms life, the other seems to negate.
The philosopher Gilles Deleuze really nails it here. He says that audiences just instinctively follow vitality. The panther is pure affirmation of life. It's unapologetic, it doesn't need to explain itself, it just is. The hunger artist, with all his negation and withdrawal, he's the opposite. The audience's choice to look at the panther instead isn't even really a choice, it's an instinct. But this is maybe the most important point of the whole story. Kafka is not telling us to go out and be panthers. He's not saying we should just give up on seriousness and embrace mindless energy. No. He's showing us a tragedy. The tragedy of a world that has completely lost the ability to even see, let alone value, a deep, quiet kind of devotion. And so that leaves us with the story's final haunting question, the one it doesn't answer. The artist lived his life with total devotion to his own nature, but his life left nothing, no trace. So if you live a life with perfect sincerity, but no one sees it and no one remembers it, did it have meaning? Kafka doesn't give us an answer. He just leaves us alone with that question, and it's a tough one.